Welcome to the Butterfly Tumblr Radio channel. Are you ready to start today's story? Let's get started. Imagine your perfect life with your spouse suddenly shrouded in doubt. As a game of betrayal silently unfolds. In this emotionally entwined novel, April and Gary's marriage appears blissful. Yet it conceals secrets unknown to all. Join us as we delve into the fog of uncertainty, exploring the complex entanglement between trust, betrayal and forgiveness. April, Gary and I are in our 30s. Married for 5 years and have no children. We dated briefly in college and after graduation. We both got jobs at a large company called Secure, where we continued dating. I really enjoyed my years of dating and the variety of sexual experiences that dating gave me. When I finally had sex with Gary, he was different from the others, damn it. But the man is perfect. I don't know what happened to us after that. It seems to me that I was ready for a serious relationship with him. But he did not ask me to meet. And when he finally did this, I had already agreed with someone else and was forced to refuse him. A few days later, he left Secure and started his own business. After that, we only saw each other occasionally when he would drop by the Friday bar, where security employees gathered. One evening when I was there alone, I invited him to join me for wings and another beer. After everyone else had left, I asked him how he was doing and if he missed working at Secure, and was surprised and delighted when he said that the only thing he missed was seeing me every day. Hell, I missed him too. And although I don't remember everything, we somehow ended up together after that later. Despite my desire to avoid long-term commitments and enjoy everything the world had to offer, I realized that I loved Gary and wanted to be with him. When after some hints he proposed to me, we got married. We became friends with Ryan and Linda, our housemates. They moved into our neighborhood just a month after us. And although they were 7 or 8 years older than us, we quickly became friends. We were able to buy this house because Gary's business was very successful. And we are now quite wealthy. Linda and her sister received an inheritance from their mother. But before the inheritance was finalized, the sister died. And her husband insisted that Linda receive the entire inheritance. This money allowed them to afford to live here too. We shared property lines, cleaning services, and many common interests. And the age difference didn't seem significant. We dined at theirs and they at ours. And we often went out together all this time. I did not notice anything that could be considered more than normal sexual innuendo between the four of us. I liked Ryan. And I could see that he was attracted to me too. But neither of us said or did anything about it. The same could be said about Gary and Linda. Ryan and Linda were an attractive couple. And I think by most people's standards, we were attractive too. So there must have been a mutual attraction. It's just that none of us did anything inappropriate. Or so I thought. About a year after meeting Ryan and Linda, I began to suspect that Gary was cheating on me. I found some subtle signs on his dirty clothes, things like the faint scent of a woman, as well as what looked like lipstick marks on the inside of his boxers. Yes, lipstick, they were faint. But I was almost sure it was lipstick. There were even signs that he had bought new underwear because I didn't recognize some of them. The woman's scent was familiar, but I couldn't place it. When I started paying more attention, it became obvious that if he was cheating, it must be at work since he was rarely out in the evenings. We were home almost every night, except for a couple of Fridays a month on Friday night, when he had a poker night with friends at the club. I noticed the signs every weekend or so and became more and more suspicious, but was hesitant to blame Gary until I was sure of something specific. I didn't know what to do with what I found. I needed someone to talk to. So I shared it with Linda. I didn't want to scare her since Ryan was also in the poker company. But I had no one else to discuss it with. I decided to take a risk and told her. She tried to console me and convincingly stated that she really did not believe Gary was capable of such a thing. She said that the signs I described were too minor and that I was probably wrong. She also convinced me not to do anything drastic until I was sure. Which made me feel calmer. Of course, Linda is right. I must have been mistaken, I thought, however. I wasn't sure and kept interrupting the dirty laundry, looking for additional signs and finding nothing. Linda must have been right in the end. Gary was as attentive to me as always. Our sex life wasn't great, but it was good. And feeling a little guilty for being suspicious of him, I started planning how I could make up for it all by adding a little spice. Gary responded exceptionally well. The following Friday, after I talked to Linda, I decided to give Gary a special homecoming night. We made love. Wow, honey, that was fantastic. He kissed me and hugged me, and I felt like I was in seventh heaven. I started this out of a little guilt over suspecting him of cheating, but now I was already planning a few more of these meetings since it was so cool. I became convinced that I was wrong about the possibility of Gary cheating until the following Friday poker night. I got up around midnight to get a drink of water and happened to look out the kitchen window that overlooked Ryan and Linda's house and saw a man walk around the side of the house and enter the back door without knocking. It was too dark to see who it was, but I knew it wasn't Ryan. Ryan is a big man, and this guy was smaller, about Gary's size. Then it dawned on me, he even walked like Gary. Maybe my heart started racing as I thought the worst, Gary and Linda. Then it occurred to me why the feminine smell on underwear was familiar. It was the same scent as Linda's. I watched the house until the light in the living room went out, and soon the light in the guest bedroom came on. Not a good sign, I thought. Apparently Linda had a lover, and it was apparently Gary. After some thought about what to do, I put on warm workout clothes and sneakers, left the house, and quietly entered their back door. Luckily, it wasn't locked. I started creeping towards the bedroom. I heard male and female voices. It looked a lot like Gary, but I still couldn't be sure, and of course, I hoped with all my heart that it wasn't him. In which case, I certainly wasn't going to barge in on them. What if it's not him? Finally, I returned home and took a seat by the kitchen window, turning off the light. I waited for over an hour before I saw a man coming out the back door. I watched as he went out into the street and turned right towards our house. I quickly moved to the living room window to continue observing. I saw him turn onto our path and head towards our front door. Now there are almost no doubts left, I thought. Defeated at this stage, I hurried back to the bedroom, climbed into bed, and waited, although it took longer than I expected. I soon heard the key being inserted into the lock and the front door opening. It was Gary. The bastard cheated on me with Linda. No wonder she tried to convince me that he wasn't cheating. I thought she was my friend. What should I do now? These and other thoughts swirled through my head as my pain turned to anger and thoughts of revenge. I loved Gary, but I couldn't stand the fact that he was cheating on me, and I had to do something. I couldn't think of anything else but how I could get back at them, hoping I wouldn't lose him if I hadn't already. Saturday morning, I pretended to be asleep while Gary got up, got dressed and went out to his usual round of golf. I spent the next part of the day devising a plan to get revenge on Gary and Linda. I needed an accomplice, a very specific accomplice. I watched from the kitchen window until I saw Linda leaving. She usually went to the gym on Saturday afternoons. I immediately called Ryan. Hello. Hi Ryan, it's April. Hi April. Glad to hear your sexy voice on such a beautiful Saturday morning. Thank you, Ryan. But this is not such a great day for me. I have a serious problem and I need to talk to you. I know Linda is not home right now, and I was wondering if you could help me. You know I'll do everything in my power to help you. April, just tell me what you need. I wouldn't like to discuss this over the phone. Can you come over? Of course. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Thanks, Ryan. See you in a few minutes. Well, when Ryan arrived, I let him in and asked him to sit down while I prepared the drinks, only soda. He said I wanted something stronger, but I also chose soda. I bought the drinks, handed it to him and started talking. Ryan, I have a problem and I need some advice. Of course, I'll be happy to help if I can. It all sounds quite mysterious. It is very difficult for me to discuss. But since you are one of our best friends, I hope that you can give me some good advice. Speak. Tell me everything. With a slight pause I began. I think Gary is having an affair actually. I don't just think, I know. What are you sure? Yes. I just can't believe it. You seem so happy together. I have to say, April, he would be the last person I would think of to cheat on his wife. After all, you're not only one of the most beautiful and sexy women I know, you are also a very nice person. And Gary himself often says this. He often compliments you when the guys and I are talking. Gary must be a real idiot if he really does that. Thank you, Ryan. I would like to ask you for some advice. I still love Gary. I love him very much. But I can't stand his cheating. What do you think I should do? I mean, if you were in my place and found out that Linda was cheating, what would you do? Ryan's expression looked like he'd been caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But he recovered quickly. Damn. That's a tough question. I admire the way you stick with Gary. It's not easy to accept the fact that your spouse is cheating on you behind your back. What would I do? I'm not sure. Yes, I love Linda. But that would be a very difficult decision. Do you mean you would consider divorce? Well, it would depend on the circumstances, but yes. If she was doing it behind my back, I would think about it, but when it comes down to it, I would probably try to resolve the situation somehow. I have to say that the thought of Linda doing something like that never even crossed my mind. He said with a laugh, maybe I should think about it. I'm glad to hear that because my problem is also your problem. Ryan, what do you mean my problem too? Gary sleeps with Linda. He was amazed. You're kidding. Right? No, I'm not joking. I wish I was joking. But unfortunately I saw, or better yet, heard them last night. They didn't see me. But I heard everything. When I saw him leaving your house I waited a while. And soon Gary came through the front door. Dan. April, are you sure about this? I know Linda loves him. She said it often. But I don't know if she could have done it behind my back. Damn, Gary and I were together last night. Though he left before me. Shock and perhaps fear flashed across his face. I think Gary left the poker game earlier and went to your house. He seems to be doing this a couple of Fridays a month for a while now. I found a foreign scent on his underwear and even traces of lipstick. And it's Linda's scent, I'm sure of it, I continued. And his expression changed from shock to anger. That bastard has actually been gone before lately. A few times now that I think about it. And if you'll pardon the expression, Linda does have that obsession with lipstick. And this morning at breakfast, Linda seemed different, nervous in some way. That's the reason that bastard said he wanted to go home to his sexy wife. So he was with my wife. Yeah, he lost his temper. I'll kill this bastard. Wait a minute, Ryan. I have a proposal for you. I want to get revenge on both of them and teach them a lesson at the same time. If you agree, we could have some fun and get revenge at the same time. After he calmed down, Ryan agreed to listen to me. Okay, what do you mean? Before I tell you my plan, I would like to ask you a personal question. Yes. Please ask. Do you find me attractive? I mean, have you ever thought about me in a sexual context? He's a little taken aback. He hesitated, smiled, and replied, you took me by surprise. I could lie and say that I didn't. But the truth is that I have fantasized about you many times. You are a very beautiful woman, Linda, and I once. He hesitated, looking almost embarrassed. Then continued. I want you to understand that these were just fantasies. I never seriously considered taking action. I love Linda too much to do anything that would harm our relationship. Why are you asking? I wanted to ask what he started talking about Linda, but decided not to spoil the atmosphere and said, I had similar thoughts about you. You are a very sexy man. I think almost everyone fantasizes about other attractive people. It's forbidden fruit syndrome. I'm very flattered. April, I had no idea. Now that I knew Ryan was attracted to me, I laid out my plan to him. He was inspired and was confident that we could accomplish this. We discussed all the details for the next hour. He left with a big smile on his face. I have to admit that I had a smile too. even though I was upset about what Gary and Linda had done. My plan with Ryan worried me. I gathered all the necessary materials and waited for Gary to return from golfing. Gary returned home, took a shower, and we had dinner. After dinner, he dozed off in his rocking chair as usual. Soon, Gary woke up and I got his attention. I said I wanted to try something new. Blindfolded Gary, then sat him on a chair in the bedroom and tied his hands and feet. Gary asked if I tied him too tight. I told him that everything was fine and that I was planning to give him an unusual performance. I left him tied up and called Ryan after a while. Ryan came, and I led him into the bedroom to the tied-up Gary. After removing Gary's blindfold, I explained that I had found out about his affair with Linda. I decided to take revenge in the same way. To have sex with Ryan in front of Gary. Gary denied cheating and begged me not to do it. But we were adamant. I told him I loved him and that I hoped we could get through this ordeal. I left him tied up so he could think about how to make amends. I threw on my robe and let Ryan wear Gary's robe for the ride to his house. We left Gary tied up and went to Ryan's, where Linda was in the same position as Gary. She, unlike Gary, did not deny her betrayal but continued to tell Ryan that he was making a mistake. A big mistake. We ignored her protests and repeated our performance for her. Linda was not happy, but what could she do? Before I left, I had to tell Linda my 2 cents. I hope you enjoyed the show. We did it earlier for your lover Ryan. I told Gary he wasn't going to stop tonight. I totally agreed with him. We have a lot to deal with. You two have been cheating on us for a while now. Linda just sat there, looking sad and shaking her head. I paused, then continued, you were my best friend. But best friends don't cheat on each other behind their backs. I sincerely hope that you and Ryan can work this out. I really want this, but I have my own problems, whom I need to take care of. The next few moments became the worst of my life when Linda's eyes suddenly widened in shock when I said, best friends don't cheat on each other behind their backs. April, if I understand what you and Ryan are thinking correctly, you have a lot more problems than you think. She then turned to her husband Ryan and said, Linda, I'm sorry for what I did to you, I really am. But are you and April? Gary has been your friend for so long. But I can't imagine that he would agree to let you use April for revenge on me for what I did to Cleve. From the sound of it all, you were wrong about Gary and Cleve, exclaimed Ryan. My chest tightened. But I was able to say, don't lie, Linda. I came here and heard you and Gary last night and saw him come home right after you finished. Ryan knew he was leaving the poker game. Used to be almost every Friday. Tears streamed down her cheeks, and for a moment, I thought I felt the satisfaction of revenge. But Ryan's face showed concern. Something went wrong. I looked back at Linda as she sobbed, oh my God. What have you done, Ryan? I'm sorry. But you know we were talking about Clive. And it was your idea to have a threesome. You knew I wanted to do it with you. But I was nervous and thought you'd agree if I did it with him once before we all got together. I always thought Gary was attractive. But he's our friend and April was my friend. I haven't met Gary. April. You know that Gary checked the alarm system for George and Harriet White on their weekend crap. I knew it. I forgot. My chest was so tight that I couldn't breathe for the first time since last night. Doubt began to flood my mind. Then I remembered that Gary was still tied up. Oh God, no, please no. I ran home to find Gary still tied up in a chair. His face wet with tears. I began to break his chains, screaming, forgive me, forgive me. As soon as he was free and standing, rubbing his wrists, Ryan burst into the room. Damn, Gary. I'm so sorry. We thought it was you and Linda. We really did. We thought it was you and Linda, exclaimed Ryan at Gary, whose face was still wet from tears and expressed such sadness that alone could have made me cry. I stood tall and said, I really don't know what you're talking about. I feel bad. Please go away, Ryan. Before I do something stupid and give you a reason to beat me other than how you slept with my wife. I don't want to see you or talk to you. Despite his nakedness, Gary walked across the room with his head held high and went into the dressing room, where he began to dress. "Oh God, Gary, I'm so sorry," I said, unable to think of anything else to say. After a few moments, it was obvious that Gary was about to leave. "Gary, please don't leave, I'm sorry. I'll do anything to fix this, please." Gary looked at me for a moment, seemingly confused, then said with a sob, "Oh no, not Linda and Cleve." "How did you know this?" exclaimed Ryan. "I didn't know before I saw someone coming out of your house around 2:00 in the morning, just as I was about to walk in the front door. And when he saw me, he came up to say hello. It was Cleve." "Gary, please forgive me. And you need to know that this was not Ryan's idea. I convinced him that you and Linda were cheating on us, and I offered to do it in front of you. I'm sorry. I will do anything to fix this, April. I won't stay here tonight. And I won't discuss this anymore tonight. I need time to think about everything. No matter what I come up with. I'll call you tomorrow or come here. But I'm not here tonight, I'll stay with Ryan." Then intervened Gary, "I'm not without sin either. I swear when I heard what April said, just like she did, I believed that you and my wife were cheating on us. And I was angry and hurt. My guilt doesn't end there. Ever since Linda's sister Annie died, Leave Anna remained close. You know, he didn't even take Annie's share of her parents' inheritance. Over time, I suggested that many consider the possibility with Cleve and me." Then he lowered his head as if ashamed and continued, apparently addressing both of us, "We love each other very much. We both love Cleve. And it would seem very exciting. But from what I understand, Linda was nervous to begin with, April. Now you know that they met last night. Not so much behind my back, but rather to better prepare for my fantasy because of some other things. You come home right after Linda sees someone, Cleve, leaving my house. You are late on Fridays because of poker. And you forget that checking the alarm for your clients. And I realized there was some suspicious stuff in the laundry basket. We thought it was you and Linda. I did a terrible thing, Gary. And I can't say how sorry I am," Gary snapped. Then turned to leave. As he was leaving, he turned around and said, "Think about it, Ryan. There's no reason to go. You can stay and be with her all night. But I don't need to be a spectator." With these words he went out to the garage, got into the car and drove away. It hurt, but I deserved it. Moments after Gary left, Linda entered the house. What a change from earlier when Ryan and I put on a show for her. And she put up with it, thinking it was Ryan's revenge for her time with their brother-in-law. Cleve's situation he clearly encouraged. Anger was so visible that I recoiled from it. A real contrast from before when I was in control. "Ryan, you just ruined one of the best men we know. Of all the men this could happen to me. You should have known he would be the last." She said this angrily. He was the last person who would have been there because Ryan and I had already offered to do an exchange and later a threesome without you. And he didn't want anything to do with it. He wouldn't do something behind your back and wouldn't approach you with this proposal because I didn't want it to seem like he loved you less than he really did. What I did to Cleve without telling Ryan was a mistake. It was part of my own insecurities. Ryan wanted it so much. And I was afraid of not being able to handle it if I had to do it with both of them for the first time. I asked Cleve to come here while Ryan was at the poker game so that we could meet alone. And I could be better prepared to please them both when we are together. Your husband has never been in bed with me. And I'm not kidding when I say I wish he was. He's a wonderful man. And you should do everything you can to get him back because, honestly, I don't think you'll find anyone better than him." It was a long and tearful night. Linda sent Ryan home, letting him know how angry she was with him. And then stayed with me for the night. It's strange. I was so angry with her. And now someone was saving my peace of mind. Linda. Between brief bouts of anguish and then restless sleep, Linda told me that after I shared with her my suspicions that Gary was cheating, she spoke with Carla, our housekeeper, and learned that instead of washing small batches of delicates and underwear in both houses, She brought everything to us and washed everything together to save time and effort. She asked Carla not to do that again and thought Carla would mention it to me. It was Linda's smell in our laundry basket because some of her clothes were there along with Ryan's laundry. The next morning Ryan came again. And Linda called her brother-in-law Cleve. We spoke to him on speakerphone at Linda's insistence. He was reluctant to speak at first because he didn't know anything about me and April or what happened. But after a brief explanation, he confirmed what we already knew. He told us that as he was leaving their house, Gary was at our front door and called out to him. He tried to act like nothing special was happening. So he came up to our porch to say hello to Gary. And they talked for a few minutes before parting ways. That's why Gary came into the house so late. I slept intermittently for part of the day, jumping up every time the phone rang. Throughout all this time Linda was nearby, who tried to help me get some rest around 2:30 p.m. The phone rang again and as always Linda answered. After the conversation, she came into the bedroom to tell me that Gary was returning home from the White House, where he had spent the night. I've never been so excited in my life. Gary looked terrible but no worse than I felt. After many tears begging, and even unsuccessful requests on my part, it became clear that Gary was not going to stay at home. He was considering moving out while he tried to sort out his feelings. He wasn't friendly but he wasn't violent either. He calmly explained that he was in pain and that he didn't want to stay with me yet. I offered to move in on my own at least while we sorted things out. But he said that if he stayed here, the memories would be too painful for him. Over the next 2 hours he gathered his things, promised to let me know when he was settled, then to my surprise kissed me on the cheek and said, "I love you, April. But I'm in so much pain that I can't handle it directly now." Then he left. I can only remember some parts of the next 10 days. True to his word, Gary called from a downtown hotel that night to tell me where he was. Following Linda's advice, I sold all the furniture in the master bedroom the next day and painted the room. The next day, she helped me choose a completely new interior. The following Wednesday morning, he called and asked to have dinner with me. I was so excited and hopeful. I immediately called Linda, who has been with me through it all. Despite what I did to her, she was never mad at me for sleeping with Ryan. She was angry about what Ryan and I did to Gary. Exactly at 18:15 Gary arrived. He came to the door. And although I was filled with excitement to talk to him about what had happened, I was almost crushed when I realized that he had rung the doorbell of his own home. I pulled myself together and answered the door. He looked much better than the last time I saw him. But he still looked nothing like the old Gary. I invited him in but he smiled and said no. Thank you. And asked if I needed a little more time. Hell, I was ready within minutes of his call. So I grabbed my purse, locked the door, and walked over to the car, where he opened the door for me. This was something he hadn't done in a very long time. Gary sat in the driver's seat, looked at me, and smiled and then got straight to the point. "April, this is awkward for me and probably for you too. Do you mind if we just go to a restaurant and talk there?" I said I didn't mind. And we drove in silence to a local restaurant we'd been to before. Once upon a time, we sat in a secluded booth in the corner, barely able to pay the bill, and rushed home to make love. I hope this was a good sign. We made small talk, then ordered. But both seemed to be concentrating on the wine and barely touched the food. Finally Gary moved on to the topic of the evening. "April, I can't find a way out of this situation. I watched that night over and over again. I remember you telling me several times that you loved me. And I tried to focus on that. But all my thoughts go back to you and Ryan and to what you did and said. I'm sorry that I'm not stronger. I really love you and want to find a way out of this. Assuming of course that you want it. I want to. I know I hurt you and I'm ashamed and sorry. And I'll do everything I can to make it right. What I'm asking for is time. I need to deal with things I never imagined. I'd like to see you from time to time while I do that. But I need more anything. Just say it if I'm not tough enough or something to handle it. And we end up getting divorced, please, Gary, no. I interrupted him. I started crying. If we end up getting divorced, he continued, please know that I don't hate you or Ryan. And I would like to maintain as much of the friendship as I can. He continued, thank you, Gary. If it comes down to it, I'll do it. But I don't want to be just your friend. I want to be your wife, your friend, and your lover, who is grateful for the chance to make amends for the pain you've caused and for my lack of trust. Please take as much time as you need, and yes, please meet with me as often as you can. Gary looked better as we talked, and I began to feel encouraged. We had wonderful times when we were dating. I wish I could relive some of those moments with you again. We finished dinner, and when he drove straight home, I knew what I wanted and decided I should ask, could you come over for just one drink? I'd prefer it if you stayed, but I respect your need for time. Gary smiled and accepted the invitation. As soon as we walked in, I asked him to pour the drinks while I changed. I didn't want to go overboard, so I changed into a sort of negligee that was more like a reception robe. The negligee was formal enough that I hoped it wouldn't look too intrusive. It covered me enough that I didn't put on any panties or bra, hoping to get Gary back into our shared bed where he belonged. When he saw me, he said, wow, April, you look great. First dinner, then the car door, and now I look great. This hasn't happened for quite some time, however. The conversation began to decline, each of us trying to find a topic for conversation that would not remind us of that Saturday night. After almost half an hour of this conversation, Gary said that he had to go and got up to leave. I walked him to the door and was glad to receive a kiss, even if it was on the cheek. I'm sure there were tears in his eyes when he walked away, and we stood looking at each other. Despite my promise to give him time, I leaned forward and kissed him on the lips. He soon gently but persistently pulled me away. I'm sorry, April, I really wanted this, I really did, he said as his tears started flowing. And soon I started crying too. He left. His next call came on Saturday morning to tell me that he was moving from the hotel to an apartment near his office the following Wednesday, and that he would like to pick up his desk, one of our computers, and more of his clothes and personal items. I was terribly scared and turned to our friend Linda for support. I told her how afraid I was that I wouldn't be able to get him back. She was sensitive, intuitive, and caring. It's hard to believe that just a short time ago, I almost hated her. Gary and I met twice more for dinner over the next 2 weeks and took a trip to the lake where we have property. But the conversation was difficult, and neither of us enjoyed our time together. We met by chance 2 days later when I was having lunch at the mall. Linda and I were shopping, but she had an appointment with a dentist who is in the same shopping center. I was waiting for her in the cafe when Carl Teddy stopped to say hi and was essentially trying to start a relationship with me. He heard that Gary had left, and I'm sure he was trying to get into my pants. Carl has quite a reputation in this regard. Carl looked good, and in other circumstances, I might have been interested, but I love Gary, and I want him to forgive me and come home so I can try to make up for all the damage I caused him. I'm sure I made that clear to Carl. Unfortunately, while Carl was sitting at the table with me, Linda returned with Gary, whom she had just met at the dentist. They stopped at the food court entrance, and it was obvious that Gary had changed his mind about joining us when he saw Carl and me. Linda confirmed this when she joined me moments later. I felt terrible. I saw Gary again the following Friday at a restaurant near the supermarket we usually use. I was finishing my shopping, and as I walked by, I saw Gary sitting at one of the tables. The woman was with him, but she was sitting with her back to me at first. I felt the urge to run and hide, but that's what Gary did when he saw Carl and me, and he came to the wrong conclusions. I decided not to repeat his mistake. I took a deep breath and walked in, waving to Gary as I approached the table, and was overjoyed to see his cousin Ruth stand up to hug me and say hi. They asked me to join them for coffee, which I did, and when we left they both kissed me goodbye. The next call from Gary came on Sunday around 11:30 a.m. He apologized for the short notice and asked if he could come by that afternoon. Yes, I said, anytime, come now if you want. He said he had some work to do but would be here around 2 p.m. over the next 2 hours. I began to worry about what he might say. As nervous as I was, I realized that we couldn't go on like this forever. I'm sorry for what happened, and I'd like a chance to fix it. But if he can't or won't give me that chance, then we'd better both move on. My mind told me to prepare for the worst. When Gary arrived, he seemed determined but also vulnerable at the same time. We sat down in the living room, and he started talking. April, I've been thinking a lot. We both made mistakes, and I know you regret what happened. I too regret my reaction and the way I left. But I feel that if we can talk openly about our mistakes and work together on our problems, maybe we can find a way to repair our relationship. My heart beat faster with hope. I agree, Gary. I'm willing to work on this as long as it takes. I really love you. It takes me a while to fully trust you again, but I want to try. Could we start with some couples therapy sessions? Sure, I think it's a great idea, I said, feeling relieved and hopeful. We spent the rest of the day together, discussing how we could restore our understanding and trust. Gary hugged me tightly goodbye, and the hug seemed like a promise of a better future. The next few months were difficult but productive. We attended regular therapy sessions to help us slowly rebuild our connection as we learned to communicate better and understand our feelings. Our attitude improved. Looking back to this time a year after that evening, I see that although it was one of the most difficult times in our lives, it was also one of the most meaningful. We have learned to appreciate each other and our time together more than ever. And although our past has not disappeared, we have learned to accept it and move forward, working together to build stronger and healthier relationships. I am grateful for every day we spend together, learning from the past and looking forward to our future. Ryan and I play poker at our club twice a month. But I have clients who are also friends and whose contracts were the beginning of my success with my own company. They own a jewelry business and have a home alarm system because they often have valuable items in their home. They travel periodically, and to make them feel at ease, I check their system while they are away. Unfortunately, this means that sometimes I have to leave poker early. But it was their contract that started my success. And they are great people, so I do it. One Friday night I left poker early, checked their house, and found that the system showed open. I looked around and eventually found an open window, but there was no sign of forced entry. So I closed it, reset the alarm, and drove home. As soon as I arrived home, I saw a man coming out of Ryan and Linda's house. And since he was too short to be Ryan, I became suspicious and began to go over to check. He waved to me and came to my doorstep. It was Clive, their son-in-law. His wife died some time ago. She was Linda's sister. Clive and I talked for a few minutes, and then he left. And I went into the house where I found April sleeping. It was disappointing when she rejected me when I pressed myself to her a week earlier. She had given me an unexpectedly passionate night, and I was hoping for a repeat. We'd had a pretty good sex life before, but I seemed to be expecting something more. And the next day when I returned from golf, April was up for it too. She was dressed sexy and was described as interested in some games. This seemed like a continuation of last Friday night. So I took off my clothes and let her tie me up by the chair. And as she said, "Play with me," expecting me to tie her up and do the same. April looked so beautiful and sexy, and I felt like I had died and gone to heaven. Before the evening was over I found myself living. But I was in hell once she had me securely tied up. She brought our neighbor Ryan into our bedroom, and as payback for the alleged affair they alleged between Linda and me, my wife April had sex with Ryan. She claimed I was with Linda last night, but I was at the Whites and remembered too late that I had to reset their alarm. And the computer clearly recorded that I was there because I had to use my own code. They claimed that my clothes smelled like Linda's perfume and that her lipstick was on my underwear. And even that I had new underwear that I wore just for her. I knew it wasn't true, but they didn't listen. I became desperate, hoping it was all a dream and that I would wake up and everything would be okay. Or that it was a joke and Linda would show up soon. But this did not happen, and despite my protests, April called me a liar and announced that she would have sex with Ryan and perhaps even other men. They then left me tied up, apparently to repeat the process in front of Linda. It occurred to me that my marriage was over. They disappeared for a long time. And through the heartache, I realized that this would be really bad. I loved April with all my heart. I was looking for a way to deal with it. And all I could think about was revenge. But somewhere at the bottom of my soul, I remembered my mom's words, when your heart is broken like this, in time you will get better. And that's what you will remember most. It's not the pain but how you dealt with it. You will either be ashamed of how badly you did, or you will find comfort in maintaining your dignity despite the pain. I decided to behave with dignity. Although I was angry and hurt by what they had done, I decided that there was no way I would rush into plans for revenge or say or do anything to humiliate myself further than they already had. I was shocked when I heard April burst into our house, screaming, "I'm sorry," again and again. When she reached the bedroom, she broke the ropes, continuing to apologize as she did so. Ryan followed her in, also apologizing out of breath. She told me everything she saw and heard, which convinced her of my betrayal. She was hysterical and crying, and it was difficult to understand what she was saying. But it was clear that I had a vision in my mind of her having sex with Ryan, and I could still hear her telling me how great he was doing. Then something clicked. April overheard Linda having sex with someone she thought was me in their house. "Clive," I said out loud. Ryan was surprised that I knew. But it was Clive who had been out late that night and who came to talk to me from their house. I wanted to cry, but not in front of these people. I wanted to maintain my dignity. So I told April as calmly as possible that I wouldn't stay and that I would call before I left. I lost some of my composure and told Ryan off and that he didn't have to leave since I was leaving. And he could continue, but without me as a spectator. As soon as I was out of sight, the sobbing and tears started. But at least it wasn't in front of them. I had no place to go. So I just drove for a while until I realized that I was near the White's house. And they were away. I went in and took a nap on their couch. The next day, I called and said that I would come by to pick up my things. The 2 hours I spent there were almost as much hell as the previous night. But I remained true to my promise to behave with dignity and even kissed April on the cheek as I left. I checked into the hotel and spent many hours reviewing what happened in my head. Trying to be thorough, I wrote down what I knew. April kept saying she loved me, even when she was having sex with Ryan. Ryan and April both apologized, admitting they made a mistake, even though it was wrong. Evidence came out that it was me who was with Linda. And the most striking of all was that April seemed absolutely devastated when everything became clear. At the bottom of the sheet I casually wrote, "I love April." I decided to take my time and called April. Inviting her to dinner, it was awkward, and we couldn't talk much. But I was able to tell her that I loved her and that I needed time to get over it all. That night after dinner, she asked me to come over for a glass of wine. And I agreed. The conversation was just as awkward. And I decided to leave, but as I was leaving, she kissed me goodbye. Embarrassed, I pushed her away, apologized and left for the next 2 days. I tried to rationalize what had happened. It was traumatic. At work I overheard Carrie, my secretary, telling one of her colleagues that she and her boyfriend couldn't rent out his apartment anymore. They recently moved in together and decided to leave her apartment. I called her to my office, and an hour later, I was looking around a very nice, almost fully furnished apartment not far from work, or at least from what used to be my home. I called April to tell her the news and was surprised how upset she was. It became obvious that she wanted to fix the situation. And now I was the problem. I really was a problem. but would rather start living separately than April be saddled with an emotional disability who couldn't have sex anymore. No matter how hard I tried, I really couldn't hate her or Ryan. Having analyzed all the facts, if the circumstances had been the other way around, I am afraid that I would have come to the same conclusion as April and Ryan. I actually went to see them to tell Ryan how I felt. He looked worse than I felt. I'd be lying if I didn't admit that I briefly felt pleasure from it. But it didn't help in the big picture. I called and asked April for my desk and one of the computers. And although she said she would prefer that I come home and use them, she didn't mind if I took them the next day. I saw my family doctor, who sent me to a clinic specializing in men's problems. I was there for over 3 hours while they poked and tested and asked questions that were awkward as hell at first. But I eventually started answering as calmly and coolly as possible. At the next appointment, the doctor was both direct and brief. Forgive me for the apparent rudeness of my answer, but there are no organic reasons that you cannot have sex. Everything is fine with the equipment. To continue the analogy, you just need some reprogramming. There was an injury and you need her to recover. But it should just take time and continued attempts. Occasional failures are normal, even when there is no injury. Back in the apartment I thought about this. Keep trying, of course. All I want is to end up with April and be left inactive again. Especially after she was so impressed with Ryan. Later that week, I was at the dentist when I saw Linda. She came over and hugged me warmly and it felt nice. I realized that I really cared about her. But I would never do anything inappropriate. And when I felt something from her hug, I was confused. I wasn't sure. But she seemed to have a flirtatious smile on her face. And it occurred to me for a moment that I might be exposed after all. She, however, seemed really happy to see me and wanted me to go with her to the food court since April was waiting for her there. However, all hopes were dashed as April seemed to be in deep conversation with Carl Teddy. Carl was known to be a ladies' man, and I would have thought he wasn't her type. But they found themselves deep in conversation. I had an internal debate. I felt like I should come over and say hello. But I also realized that things might not work out between me and April. And it would be wrong to in any way interfere with her attempts to move on with her life. I believe that the appearance of an estranged husband when you are talking to another man can harm your chances with that man. For the sake of what might be in April's best interests, I decided to decline. Linda was worried and tried to convince me otherwise. Then she even got a little angry. But I insisted and left. We had one pleasant meeting that was not planned. I was having lunch with my cousin Ruth when April walked in and waved to us. We asked her to join and she did. This was the first time since that night that I felt completely comfortable talking to April. Ruth was the reason for this. Ruth was more like a sister and friend to me than a cousin. And I told her everything on the condition that she not tell our family anything yet. If April and I can get our life together, some members of my family may have a hard time forgiving her. It's best to leave them alone for now. At least for now. Ruth talked about her children and husband Johnny. She made it clear to April that she knew we were going through a difficult time and said she hoped we could work things out. I could see that April felt comfortable with Ruth as we left. Ruth said that she thought she saw pain in April's eyes and that she didn't think April had forgiven herself for what had happened. Somehow I started to feel the glimmer of hope. Very few people know my cell number, so I expected it to be Carrie when it rang Saturday afternoon. Or I briefly hoped April. But I was surprised to hear both Ryan and Linda on the line. They spoke on speakerphone and together asked me to join them for dinner. They assumed correctly that I was not yet ready to return to the old neighborhood. So I was to join them at a fancy steakhouse near my office. Linda and Ryan were a big part of my life. And I needed something to fill the huge void that April left. So I accepted their invitation. I found a suit shirt and tie that didn't look like I'd slept in it. And after showering and getting dressed, I was able to arrive almost on time. When I was brought to their table, Ryan was there alone. He stood up and extended his hand. I briefly thought about refusing. But there was a look in his eyes and tears. And I just couldn't do it. He took my hand in both of his and shook it warmly. Linda just went to the ladies' room. She'll be back soon, please sit down. Would you like something to drink? I ordered vodka martini. And as it was being brought to the table, Linda appeared from the hallway on the other side of the room. Linda was an attractive woman. But dressed the way she was now. She was a real beauty, a black cocktail dress with a plunging neckline showing off an impressive cleavage. Short hem sheer stockings emphasizing gorgeous legs. And in stiletto heels. Wow, Linda, you look great. I said, standing up to greet her. Thank you. She replied as she gave me a warm lingering hug. Then sat down next to her husband. We chatted a little and then Ryan said, Gary, we want to do everything we can to help you and April get over this and get back together. Our problem is that we don't know what to do. Based on everything you and April told us, it seems that you both want this. But something is stopping you. What can we do to help? Thank you both. But I'm struggling with this and I need it too. But I'm not ready or comfortable talking about it yet. I said, knowing what I was thinking. Especially Ryan. Considering that I'm trying to compete with you and your skills in bed. They seemed to respect that and the pressure eased. We started talking about our mutual interests in music and the soundtrack for a new musical that had just come out. I just bought it, said Ryan enthusiastically. It's great, would be happy to lend it to you. The conversation continued on safe topics. And I began to feel more comfortable with them. And thanks to this and the pleasant meeting with Ruth and April that afternoon, I began to feel better than I had in a long time. It felt weird sitting here with Ryan, who had been one of my tormentors not too long ago. Further proof that I was a problem after 8:30. Ryan said that he had calls to make to the West Coast and that they would need to go. I admit I was offended, but I didn't want to say it. I thanked them sincerely for inviting me to dinner. Thanked them again when they repeated the offer. And shook hands with Ryan, this time with much more sincerity on my part. I enjoyed it for a long time and received a warm hug from Linda at that moment. I almost wished there was something between us. Her smile as she said goodbye hinted that I had been exposed again. Back at my apartment, I undressed. Put on a sweatshirt and sweatpants and nothing else. I had just settled down to watch TV when someone knocked on the door. It was Linda, if that was even possible. Looking even sexier than she had at dinner. Hello again. Ryan thought you were still awake and sent me here with this. She held up a CD of the musical we were talking about. She handed it to me as she passed by. Took off her shoes and headed into the living room. I decided to put on the CD, and when I did, I asked if she wanted a drink. Yes, please. I'll take one of those if you can handle it, she said, pointing to my martini. I made her a drink while we listened to music. Ryan's right, it's really great, I said. Looking me straight in the eye, she said yes. Sometimes is right. I decided that no answer was required. Is there a chance, she began, that you could talk to me about things more comfortably than you could with Ryan or with both of us? I felt better as our dinner conversation continued and was disappointed when it ended. But replied, maybe, Linda. Maybe when we have more time. Ryan says he has a lot of calls to make. And I have nothing else pressing to do. What about you? As I sat looking at Linda, trying to formulate an answer. Many conflicting thoughts arose in my mind. I wanted to talk. The conversation earlier made me feel better. The thought of talking to Linda, how wonderful she looked at that moment, was nice. I didn't want her or them to feel sorry for me. Linda was dressed the same as she was for dinner. And perhaps I just hadn't noticed before. But she definitely wasn't wearing a bra now. I'm sure the top 2 buttons on the front of her dress were buttoned at dinner, now they were unbuttoned. It was starting to look like a design. Did I care? With a straight face and at least initially good intentions, I said, thanks Linda, I'd like to talk. Are you sure this is okay? She smiled. Everything is fine. It took me a while to get started. But with the help of a martini and Linda's caring and compassionate gaze, I began to lay out all my fears. I couldn't understand how April could have sex with Ryan while saying she loved me and not Ryan. If she enjoyed sex with Ryan so much, could she ever really be satisfied with me? And after 2 extra martinis, the clincher, I still couldn't lift it, so why all the fuss? I tried not to let myself get completely embarrassed and start crying. Apparently, Linda noticed because she moved to the couch and hugged me. It was nice we made love. The dreams must have been pleasant. Unlike most of the dreams in recent weeks. We need to talk. Linda's beautiful face smiled at me. And she said with obvious sincerity, "You love me, don't you?" My look of shock gave me away before I began to literally stutter. Linda, She laughed so beautifully that I had to laugh too. "You don't love me at all. You love April, don't you?" I nodded. "You just had sex with me. But you know you love April. Are you sure you can't accept that April could have sex with Ryan and still love you?" She got ahead of me. They shouldn't have done what they did. And it was terrible for April to let you think that Ryan was better or at least as good as you. But it was a mistake, a terrible mistake. Perhaps the most important thing about making a mistake with someone you love is forgiveness. You've already forgiven her. It will take her a long time to forgive herself. I could only look at this wonderful friend who was helping me do what I needed to do, overcome myself. "I need to ask you something, please." Ask. "Is there anything about what I did last night or what happened that would make you think I was faking it? Either you're the best actress I've ever known, or you weren't faking it," I said. Trying not to sound boastful, I wasn't pretending. Now, considering that and adding the fact that I'm married to Ryan and love him very much, what makes you really think that April would think about him more than about you? You're a wonderful lover, better than that, really. I expected much better. You are different from Ryan. No better or worse in technical terms. If you can be technical on such matters, be careful and listen to everything I tell you. For me, making love with Ryan is better than sleeping with you only because I love him. April doesn't love him, she loves you. And I'm sure that even if Ryan was so good that night, she would still prefer to make love with you than sleep with Ryan. Okay, now that you're talking about Ryan, what are you going to tell him? You'll have to keep it simple. I'm not a very good liar. Hello, she exclaimed. You don't seem to be listening or connecting the dots. Well then, she added quietly, at least initially. It wasn't my idea. Remember that CD Ryan wanted to share with you? He didn't actually have it. He never had it when we left you last night. He went to the mall, bought one, and then insisted that I bring it to you. I suspected that he had other intentions. So I asked him directly what he expected me to do. He spent a long time convincing me that he loves me, that he feels terrible for what he did to you, and that you might need a confidence boost. She asked how far he expected me to go, and he said how comfortable I would be and no more. This left me a lot of room to maneuver. He was the one who insisted that I wear this dress. Gary, I would never have come here without his support. I have already made a serious mistake of this kind. I'm not going to repeat this again. He made a mistake and wants to do everything he can to make things right. I smiled, and it seemed to me that tears were welling up in my eyes. Go home and tell your wife that you love her, that you will forgive her, and most importantly, remember that she loves you and there is no reason that you cannot feel confident in yourself and in her. Then she kissed me and got out of bed. Starting to get dressed, I put on a robe. And when she finished dressing, I walked her to the door, hugged her warmly and affectionately as best I could. She kissed me on the cheek and walked out the door. Turned around and said, April feels very guilty. As she should. And we'll look for ways to make things right. Let her do it. It could be a lot of fun for both of you and really good for you. I'll tell you a secret, I definitely enjoy everything that Ryan does to get out from under the bunk. And a few minutes after I get home, I think he will enjoy it too. I called April and apologized for the late notice, asking if she could meet me that evening. I received what seemed to me an enthusiastic yes. I headed to the shower and to a new start in my life. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this episode of the story, please give it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications for updates.